Now, the identification of an incident is something that needs to be stated, right? How can we effectively respond to an incident if we don't know that one's even occurred? And how can we verify that something we find is actually an incident? And what is the criticality or the priority that we should assign to it? And so during the identification or the detection and analysis phase, if you're looking at the NIST Revision 2 model, we rely on our deployed and maintained monitoring solutions and threat intelligence and detection engineering and reporting mechanisms to alert our SOC on potential incidents as they occur so that they can be verified. And so this phase not only allows us to determine things like the legitimacy and the scope and the impact of incidents, but also makes sure that we can deploy our response resources early on to minimize their potential damage and spread. Really, we want to think about what sources of telemetry do we have in our environment, which again ties back to having proper asset management and proper monitoring and detection in our preparation stage, because that's inevitably going to determine how effective our detection and identification can really be. Right? We can't detect what we can't see, or we can't secure what we don't know exists. Right? So in reality here, we can think about being notified of some sort of alert. And when we think about the potential sources of these alerts or indicators, well, this could be a very long list. Right? We have things like our network communication and different session data or network flows collected between endpoints, maybe alerts from various security appliances, right? Maybe our SIEM or our firewalls or intrusion detection or prevention solutions, even reports from people inside and outside of the organization, right? So we could be thinking about third-party incident identification as well. Because while investing in the latest and greatest monitoring and detection tools is great for identifying incidents, assuming our detections are maintained and tuned correctly, having a clear and communicated channel for staff to report anomalies and signs of incidents is equally as important. Right? We can think of this idea of human-level identification. Right? So we could be looking at user reports, right? Like employees receiving phishing emails or maybe just emails they're suspicious about. Or maybe a user perhaps identifying a vulnerability, right? Or just something that doesn't seem right regarding an asset or a system in the network. Perhaps an employee's reporting that their workstation is acting odd, right? Maybe it's continuously blue screening or rebooting. Maybe the workstation's resources are really getting bogged down or used up due to some kind of crypto miner or bloated info stealer malware that's been implanted. And really, our help desk and IT support teams are going to be the key here to a lot of this information and insight, which is why it's really important to have that cross-team collaboration in place. Now, identification can also be done proactively through threat hunting, right? Something we're going to talk about all throughout this course and be introduced to in the next module. Really, threat hunting is this process of actively and iteratively searching through our networks and endpoints and different data sets to identify threats or intrusions, or in other words, attacks that might have evaded our automated security controls. And so again, threat hunting can really be an important source of incident identification for us and kick off retroactive incident response. Now, as we start to kick things off and mobilize our response, what we really need to do here is validate, one, do we have an incident? And two, if so, how bad is it? Right? We need to better understand the identification, right? The different findings and indicators, and begin understanding the scope of the incident to properly allocate response efforts and prioritize things effectively, and really begin planning an appropriate containment strategy. If you think about it, intrusions are almost never confined to a single system. When an attacker gains that initial foothold or that initial compromise within the network, maybe they're able to run malicious code or gain remote access to a public-facing server. That first initial system is almost never where the attacker needs to be in the network in order to accomplish their goals or their actions on objectives. Because of this, attackers are going to start to take inventory once they get this foothold. They're going to want to identify other potentially interesting systems in the network, maybe start to harvest credentials, and then use those credentials to move around the network and continue expanding their influence until they're able to gain enough privileges or get enough access to cause some real damage, exfiltrate sensitive data or do whatever they need to do according to their motivations and goals. Right? And so we might start out with one compromised system that maybe we've been alerted on. But as we identify elements of the intrusion and various indicators and artifacts, well, we're going to take all of that and use it to further scope out the incident. Right? We might very quickly pivot off of one finding and perhaps identify many other systems that were also involved in the intrusion. And so all of that is to say, there should be structured triage procedures in place to assess the severity and potential impact of an incident, to again do things like determine its urgency and the appropriate response. And we should have clear escalation paths documented to make sure that critical incidents are receiving attention and resources.